Today we're meeting with Changming Duan. Changming is the director of the counseling psychology program at the University of Kansas. And Changming is the one who introduced Carol and I to Oriental Insight, the group in China that has been responsible for the supervision training Carol and I have been doing for the last 4 years there. And in many respects, provided much of the model for what we're doing in this project. So I'm really appreciative to Changming for that. So, Changming, would you talk to us then a little bit about supervisory relationships?
This is one of my most favorite topics when we talk about relationships. In medicine, education, parenting, behavior, you name it. Almost all the modern science seems to point it at this interpersonal relationship as one important factor for achieving desired outcomes through human interactions. Our work, counseling and supervision, is probably the best cases, best examples to show how critical this human relationship is in this process in order to achieve our desired goals. So supervisee has to be someone who feels empowered, supported, motivated to do what, or to carry out what they learned in supervision and to put in practice. So supervisory relationship, I cannot overemphasize. And I don't think anyone will disagree. It's just based on years of research in the literature. I see as the least controversial findings about several decades of psychotherapy or supervision research. It's the least controversial. So the importance is very obvious and very important. So I want us to start it with having everyone spend a couple of minutes really think through your personal experiences, either as a supervisor or as a supervisee. Have you experienced a different supervisory relationship in terms of the strength and quality of the supervisory relationship? You know, you may not have the worst, but you may have a best, or if you have both, try to go through those experiences to see in what way those experiences affect your personal behavior in the relationship and affect your gaining or learning or outcome of that relationship. But let's just spend a couple of minutes to just brainstorm to see if you can generate a list. When the supervisory relationship is strong, we usually see the beginning therapists would be more capable of taking a little bit more risks and to share, to self-disclose, to learn, and keep an open attitude about supervisors' feedback. On the other hand, I don't know, many of you have experienced the bad supervisory relationship, but it could happen for supervisees to feel personally devalidated and respected, and they shut down, then they may use more denial, withhold material, sometimes withhold important clinical material from the supervisor. They resist to supervisors' suggestions or input, even sometimes show passive aggressiveness. The bottom line is that we all wanted to promote a strong supervisory relationship. So what can we do as a supervisors to help build and maintain a strong supervisory relationship? I would ask you to spend a little time to generate some of the thoughts, what you can do.
Discussion was really to get you to begin thinking about ways you can be intentional as you develop effective supervisory relationships. Dr. Duan's going to present some conceptual material that we'll then use to return to this list you've just generated and map your list against that model. Would you differentiate between relationship and the more specific concept of working alliance, and then what the implications of that might be for our work as supervisors.
We have been talking about supervisory relationship in a general term. One of the ways researchers had to identify a big marker of supervisory relationship is a supervisory working alliance. This concept has been studied for several decades, both in therapy settings and in supervision settings. This concept is pan-theoretical. It is applicable to all theoretical orientations, whether or not you're a psychodynamic therapist or you're a CBT therapist. When we talk about working alliances, that apply to all theoretical approach. It's very descriptive of the quality of relationships. Some theories, working alliance is a good expression of the level of collaboration between the therapist and the client and between the supervisor and supervisees. A big bulk of the working alliance research using a theory that developed by Borden that really unpacked the working alliance concept that seems to contain these three major components. One is both parties' agreement on the goals. Why are we doing here? Why are we have this supervisory relationship? What are our goals? And the agreement and collaboration on tasks. What are specific tasks that need to be accomplished? And both parties need to put effort in. And then also the third component is a kind of affective aspect. There's a development of bonds of trust and attachment between the two parties. So this gives us a kind of framework to see, how do we start thinking about systematically how we train ourselves to be a supervisor that's effective in building effectively supervisory working alliance.
Given what you've just told us about the alliance and its three parts, how can we use that as supervisors as kind of a cognitive map to think about relationship building and relationship maintenance?
One of the exercises I commonly ask students do, if you have to have a supervisor, what qualities do you look for? So usually people will think about probably two groups of qualities. One is more of on the personal aspect of it. Personal quality, like is this person really caring? If this person is compassionate, is this person have some demonstration of clinical competence, and plus have some cultural understanding, personal, professional, and multicultural humility, so that become a right person to be the supervisor. The second group of quality of supervisors to building effective working alliance. That would be what supervisors do. So the first group is being, the second group will be doing, focusing on the person. There are times that in supervision sessions, you wanted to attend to their emotions, particularly for beginning therapists, their anxiousness, their anxiety. As a supervisor, I think we have that power to normalize, to support, to appreciate, to help them. So this process is both in terms of building a bond, because when you help them to ease anxiety, increase confidence, those help with a bond, and they'll be in a better position to discuss with us, with the supervisors, about their goals and tasks. And they'll be more willing to go along to take some risk as and take on some challenging tasks. And the other thing from the last week class, as a supervisor, how do we lower the power differential? One of them is being humble, being show cultural humility, to express ourselves in a way we learn with our supervisees. And it's also sometimes the self-disclosure can be helpful. So we are humans as well. So the supervisees sometimes feel nervous, but when they know we do learn from our mistakes as well, maybe that's a good modeling as well. Our goal is to really help the other person to feel intrinsically motivated to take risks, to take on challenges and to learn new things, to practice new ways of thinking. So it's a change process. You know, I told my students to write down like 5 minutes is reserved for engage the supervisee in the process of reflecting on the session to see if we can learn something. Yeah, there's a power differential. Sometimes they don't feel comfortable to directly give us a negative reading, but if you are paying attention, engage them in this conversation and really show your genuine interest in knowing how you have done in this session in terms of their learning outcome, I think you'll get really genuine feedback.
Right. And
as well, there are more formal tools you can use to get the important feedback you need from your supervisees. Here are 2 of them. Both are short and both have been developed, tested to be reliable and valid. One is the Leeds Alliance in Supervision Scale. The other is the Supervision Outcome Scale, which was developed by 2 colleagues participating in this training project. You can find both of them on the Moodle page for this week's class.
With respect to task and bonds, keep thinking about the supervisory contract, that's where you spell out your expectations for what you're going to be doing together and to what end. But also in terms of the relationship part you're talking about, is a chance to talk about how you're going to be working together, any relational issues, how to deal with hierarchy and so on.
Right. Supervisory contract is such a powerful, useful tool. In a sense, I viewed it as a process is because it should be, in principle, it should be ongoing process because it gives us, provide a platform for us to organize our thinking in terms of our tasks and the goals and the ways we pave towards our goals. So I really think that if we do it well, supervisory contract process can help us to strengthen working alliance in a very significant way.
Great. So to amplify what you're saying, because I really think that's so important that we think about the supervisory contract as something we do at the outset, but you're suggesting that it keeps getting revisited and as the relationship develops and as you know more about each other.
Right. I've seen the benefit of revisiting the supervisory contract. Everyone does this early phase of supervision, which is good, which is great, because we need some ground rules, we need some baseline. So we need to know, each other, we hold each other accountable. Platform for us to talk about important aspects of supervision. What are my responsibilities as supervisor? And also when we talk about specific tasks, I know particularly our audience here, everyone has such a heavy clinical responsibilities, and your supervisees probably have a lot of clinical demands, and they don't have a lot of time. So this is a time we sit down to really sort through what are the things we cannot compromise. This is a process for them to get clarity, knowing our expectation, and also knowing, sometimes we invite them, we will say, we'll put in the contract, whenever things are not working well, if you feel not respected, you can bring it up in supervision. Supervisors will address it. And we give a little more thought, put a little more lines concerning how we're going to deal with cultural differences if arise in our supervisory relationship. The reason I said to make it process is that I found oftentimes the new issues arises and we need to have this discussion. One of the supervisees, I had worked with a super group, and she noticed that her supervisee is just not providing the report and the taping as they had agreed upon. So they revisited supervisory contract. So when it come to that part about submitting report in a day in advance and taping sessions, so that's during that moment the supervisee started saying how crushingly he felt at work, too much stress, and so mentally he did not feel he was able to carry on the clinical load he was carrying on. So this part actually helped the supervisor to serve as an advocate to help the agency to readjust its clinical responsibility, and they re-articulate what is expected for supervision. So they both reported as strengthen the supervisory relationship. So make it a process has that advantage. So now actually all my students in the class, they all have this line is that both parties, either parties, could initiate a review of a supervisory contract at any time during the relationship. Please return now to the list that your group had developed about ways we supervisors can help to ensure a strong alliance with our supervisees. Please consider each of the items on your group's list against the Borden's model. Is that item contributing to the bond element of the alliance, to agreement on goals, or agreement on tasks, or to some combination of those elements? Also, in thinking about the bond element, please consider whether the element you identified concerns the supervisor's personal qualities or attitude, such as trustworthiness or humility, or particular behaviors, for example, asking for feedback. Finally, is there anything you would now add to your list?
Changming, we've been talking a lot about the Supervisory Working Alliance and how supervisors can really maximize the quality of that. But another part of our responsibility as supervisors is helping our supervisees develop the capability to develop strong alliances with their clients. And the psychotherapy literature shows that the therapists who are able to consistently develop strong working alliances with their clients are the ones that get the best outcome. So I'm wondering what thoughts you have about that.
Our ultimate goal, major goal, is have our supervisee to improve his or her work with the client and to develop and strengthening their working alliance. Some psychotherapy literature will say, who the therapist is really matters more sometimes than what they do. So in this regard, it has a lot to do with the relationship they build with their clients. So learning, we know one way actually is modeling effect. Mm-hmm. Is when how do we model certain behavior? If we have this positive attitude to try to help them to utilize what they have rather than just focusing on what they don't have, oftentimes that give them a boost in terms of their sense of competence. So they'll be more likely to go into the sessions, the focusing on respecting the client, connecting with the client, understand the client, generating a feeling of being understood. I think it's mighty powerful. So we have to be aware. Everything we do, how do we intervene? How do we support? How do we try to show our respect, understanding of our supervisee? How do we show humility and pay attention to his or her reactions and feelings, respect them?
A lot of it's modeling. I know you've also mentioned another context using routine outcome monitoring and video review of supervisees to develop their alliance proficiency.
Outcome evaluation is a concept that actually been promoted in recent years in a lot of professions, especially in our profession, psychotherapy, is that we need to know, we need to gather data in terms of the outcome, in terms of the impact, in terms of the performance, in terms of the process, so that we can offer the best psychotherapy in counseling and or supervision when working with our supervisees.
Routine outcome monitoring, or getting session-by-session client feedback, is really regarded as best practice now in the field. We're going to cover it in greater detail later this term, but for now, just this quick point that not only do these systems rate client functioning and how that's changing session by session, but also the client's perception of the quality of the relationship with the therapist or supervisee. And that can be an invaluable learning tool during supervision.
Using audio and video recording, I found have been extremely helpful means of getting the firsthand data. I had always believed, because of that I was trained as a psychotherapist in that tradition, is that my supervisor actually listened to every single sessions of my psychotherapy, and I didn't have as many sessions, but the feedback I get, it was so helpful because my supervisor knows exactly what I did in session, and it was very helpful. So using videotape, audio tape for supervision is also extremely important.
Professor Duan has just described how helpful video review can be in helping supervisees to refine their alliance-related skills. In fact, this is the preferred option. It permits you and your supervisee to examine moment-by-moment interactions and make corrections then in their subsequent behavior. And yet, video recording isn't possible with some clientele in some settings, and yet direct observation of supervisees is an expected practice. How should we do that? We'll discuss video review and other means of direct observation later in the term.
We've talked about, the various aspects of a supervisory relationship, and I think, I assume by now, if not sooner, we do not disagree that's important. But when we try to work towards it, oftentimes a few reminders may be helpful for us. I usually try to remind myself this is a process. It should be from beginning to the end of the supervision. It should be one of the focuses. And there are multiple factors that contribute to the quality of supervisory relationship. And there are supervisor factors, there are supervisee factors, and there are client factors. Most importantly, there's a cultural and contextual factors and process factors as well. So in supervision, it depends on how it goes. Oftentimes the context, cultural, contextual factors emerge in various ways. It's just because oftentimes we're supervisor, supervisee, and the client, we may or may not be in the same social status or social reality. So some awareness about each party's responsibility to the relationship will be helpful. Of course, as a supervisors, we take the major responsibility to facilitate the process, to lead the supervisee towards the direction that's where they could recognize, understand the importance of therapeutic relationship. So they're more likely to implement it in their psychotherapy work. In the literature, if you look at literature, people talk about working alliance a lot. That's one good way to evaluate our work with our supervisee. In the complex cultural context, we also need to bring cultural empathy or cultural understanding of power and privilege, so that to the greatest degree, we try to decrease supervisee resistance in terms of getting on the same page with us to work together towards a healthy supervisory relationship. And I think it's our responsibility to work towards understanding our own cultural identity and our client's cultural identity and the supervisee's cultural identity. We probably even need to be informed in terms of what is going on in the world, in the social and cultural context, so that we can understand our supervisee's behavior in context. This much for today. I wonder if something hits you, something stick with you. So maybe we can take a few minutes to self-reflect. Maybe you can identify maybe one thing you can take away from this session, maybe share among your small group before we finally end the session. I wish everyone the best in your self competence development journey towards being an effective supervisor.
Good. Thank you so much, Changming. This has been so helpful.
You're very welcome. It's a great honor to be able to share and learn with this great audience.